The haze was thick. It clung to the trees. A weak sun burned it off in patches. Through one of those patches, Lieutenant Colonel James Ross saw them. Bayonets, thousands of them, catching the light, a massive column of men, marching northeast. He counted artillery pieces, 16, maybe 18 field guns. This was not a patrol. This was not a diversion. This was General William Howe's main force, and it was moving to flank the entire American position. Ross wrote his report. A large body of the enemy, 5,000 men, heading for the upper fords on the Brandywine. He sent the message at 11 o'clock, 9 miles south, at Shrouded's Ford. George Washington waited. He stood with 16,000 men. He believed the entire British army was right in front of him. 30,000 soldiers would fight here. The largest single day engagement of the American Revolution. 11 hours of continuous combat across the rolling Pennsylvania countryside. For Washington, the stakes were existential. His army was the last obstacle, the last defense between General Howe's 18,000 British and Hessian troops and Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the heart of the rebellion, the seat of the Continental Congress. Lose here, lose the capital. Lose the capital, lose French support. King Louis XVI watched from Versailles. He waited for proof, satisfactory proof, that the Americans could hold their own. Brandywine would be that proof. Or it would be the end. For General Howe, Philadelphia was vindication. He was freshly knighted for his victories in New York. His voyage south had been brutal. A 34-day trip from Sandy Hook, mid-Atlantic summer heat, provisions spoiled, horses died, 260 ships landed, 17,000 exhausted, seasick soldiers at Head of Elk, Maryland. 17 days later, Howe had maneuvered Washington into a battle. On ground, the British commander understood better than his opponent. Washington thought he had chosen well. The Brandywine Creek, 150 feet wide, waist deep, a natural barrier. His artillery commanded the high ground behind it. The problem was intelligence. His best scouts, Daniel Morgan's riflemen, were hundreds of miles north, fighting at Saratoga. What remained were militia cavalry, local contacts, unreliable. Washington did not understand the area. He had no credible reconnaissance. The British plan was elegant, simple, a pincer. It was devised on September 10th at Kennett Square. Lieutenant General Wilhelm von Knyphausen would advance with 6,800 men, straight toward Shrouded's Ford. He was the bait, the anchor. He would fix the American center in place. Lord Cornwallis would take the rest. 9,000 battle-hardened veterans. Howe himself would go with them. A 17-mile flanking march, north to Trimble's Ford, east to Jeffers Ford, then south. It was the same maneuver Howe used at Long Island. It had worked then. Howe had advantages. Joseph Galloway, a Chester County loyalist, gave him crucial intelligence. Roads, forgotten fords. Local Tories and deserters provided horses for his cavalry. Guides knew every farm track, every creek crossing. Washington's army was deployed blind. He placed Anthony Wayne and Nathanael Greene at Chad's Ford. John Sullivan's division stretched north along the creek. Adam Stephen and Lord Stirling reached further. Moses Hazen covered the upper fords. John Armstrong and 1,000 Pennsylvania militia guarded the south. But the critical fords, Trimble's and Jeffress, were overlooked. Washington was unaware of them. He believed Sullivan's responsibility ended at Buffington's Ford. Beyond that, he trusted Colonel Theodoric Bland's cavalry to give warning. Bland's silence would be catastrophic. On the morning of September 11th, a heavy fog settled over the landscape. It was thick enough to hide entire regiments. At 5 a.m., Cornwallis's column began its march. 30 minutes later, Knyphausen moved east. The mist provided perfect concealment. The first shots rang out near Welch's Tavern, 4 miles west of Shrouded's Ford. Brigadier General William Maxwell's light infantry skirmished with Knyphausen's vanguard. The Queen's Rangers, Major Patrick Ferguson's riflemen. Ferguson carried his own invention, a breech-loading rifle. It could fire twice as fast as any other weapon on the field. It was accurate. Maxwell's men fell back. They used the high ground near Hammerton. They fired volleys, slowed the British advance. They retreated again to Old Kennet Meetinghouse, took cover behind stone walls. British Sergeant Thomas Sullivan wrote it down. Maxwell's men kept up a running fire for 5 miles. Inside the meeting house, pacifist Quakers continued their service. Musket balls thudded into the walls. One Quaker later wrote that while there was noise and confusion without, all was quiet and peaceful within. The delaying action cost the British a Hessian major. Noted casualties were nearly half of the two lead corps. By 10:30 a.m., Tannhausen's column reached the west bank. They took positions overlooking Chadd's Ford. An eerie lull descended. Tannhausen fanned his troops out on the western heights. He made his 6,800 men look like the entire British army. Artillery on both sides opened up. A massive cannonade began. It would last for hours. Colonel Thomas Proctor's Continental Artillery fired from the heights. The British returned fire. They shredded trees, did little real damage. Washington watched from his headquarters. Confident, he believed Howe would be forced into a frontal assault, into the teeth of American artillery. Then around 11 o'clock, the report arrived. Lieutenant Colonel Ross's message. A large body, 5,000 men, 16 field pieces, moving northeast toward the upper fords. If it was accurate, Washington's entire right wing was being turned. He began to plan a probe across the river to test Tannhausen's strength. Sullivan's men started to cross. 20 minutes later, a second report came. Major Joseph Spear of the Chester County Militia. Spear had seen no British force in the northern sector. He was confident they were not there. The two reports directly contradicted each other. Washington, unable to resolve it, made a fateful choice. He called off the probe, pulled Sullivan's men back. He would later lament that Colonel Bland had sent him no information at all. Spear's report was wrong. How he missed 9,000 men marching along that very route was never determined. At that moment, Cornwallis's column was crossing Jeffers Ford. Astonished, it was undefended. Hessian Jaegers led the way. Through 3 feet of water down Birmingham Road. Through a ravine, also undefended. At 1:15 p.m., Colonel Bland finally sent a report. He had seen British forces 2 miles from the ford. The message arrived too late. A local farmer, Squire Thomas Cheney, rode to warn Washington. He was ignored at first. Finally, Washington sent Bland north again. Get a precise report. Bland rode to high ground. He saw what Ross had seen hours earlier. Thousands of British troops forming up, their red coats brilliant in the afternoon sun. The British were real. They were moving on Birmingham Hill. That hill was the last chance for a defense. Around 2 p.m., Cornwallis's exhausted troops reached Osborne Hill, a commanding position. Howe ordered a rest. Men threw themselves on the ground for an hour. Officers saw Howe showing a cheerful countenance, chatting amiably, watching the Americans scramble to redeploy. Some troops stopped at a mill to drink tea before the battle. They had marched 17 miles in 9 hours. Now they rested. Washington's orders went out. Sullivan would take command of Sterling's and Stevens' divisions. March north to Birmingham Hill. Sullivan left his own division under a French officer, Colonel de Boré. No one respected him. No one could understand him. Sterling and Stephen moved together, formed up in good order. But Sullivan's own division was spread thin. His men were forced to move overland, through hilly, rocky terrain. They arrived too far forward. Their formation was a wreck. At 4 p.m., the British attacked. Their formation was precise. The brigade of guards on the right, grenadiers in the center, light infantry and Hessian Jaegers on the left. The guards struck first. They caught de Boré's division before it had fully formed. The entire division routed, almost immediately. De Boré later showed scratches on his cheek. He said they were from English fishhooks. They were probably from briars. He fled. He was forced out of the service after the battle. On Birmingham Hill, Stevens and Sterling's divisions held. An American battery on a knoll between them fired canister and grape shot. The British were forced to halt. Take cover. Captain Ewald, a Hessian, wrote it down. The small arms fire was terrible. The counterfire was the most concentrated he had ever seen. But Howe and Cornwallis brought up their own artillery. British cannon bombarded the American guns. Hessian Jaegers and British light infantry began working around the American left flank. The Marquis de Lafayette arrived. He rode to Sterling's division. He tried to rally the troops. A British musket ball hit him in the leg. The fighting on the hill was brutal. Sullivan described it. 5 times the enemy drove them from the hill. 5 times it was regained. The summit was disputed almost muzzle to muzzle. Brigadier General Thomas Conway called it the most close and severe fire he ever saw. A British officer described the leaves falling as in autumn, cut down by grape shot. The bayonet charges were decisive. British grenadiers in the center drove forward. Fixed bayonets. American troops, many without bayonets, broke. Stevens' division fell back. Sterling's division retreated in good order, but the hill was lost. After an hour and 40 minutes, the British held Birmingham Hill. The sound of Cornwallis's guns was a signal for Knyphausen. Around 5 p.m., his forces surged across the Brandywine. They broke through the divisions of Wayne and Maxwell. The Americans retreated. They left their cannons behind. The artillery horses were all dead. It was impossible to move the guns. Proctor's artillery was captured. Armstrong's militia, never engaged, also retreated. The American left collapsed. Washington and Greene arrived near Dilworth as the hill fell. Washington's presence restored some order. He ordered Greene to make a daring 3-mile march, form a rearguard. In a miraculous 35 minutes, Greene's division formed in a crescent shape, in a grove of trees. They were the last fresh division on the field. British grenadiers marched slowly across an open field. The sun was setting. It was in their eyes. Greene's men opened fire. They engulfed the British, inflicted enormous casualties. When British light infantry tried to flank Greene's right, the Polish officer Casimir Pulaski launched a cavalry charge. For nearly an hour, Greene's divisions held. They bought time for the rest of the army to escape. When darkness fell, Greene ordered the withdrawal. Howe decided not to pursue. His troops were exhausted. The day was over. The defeated Americans retreated through the night to Chester. No complete casualty return for the American army survives. Howe reported 300 Americans killed, 600 wounded, near 400 made prisoners. Nathanael Greene estimated American losses between 1,200 and 1,300 men. They left 11 artillery pieces behind. British casualties were 587. The battlefield told its own story. Many Americans were buried in a mass grave at Birmingham Meetinghouse. The Quaker Meetinghouse grounds bore witness to the destruction. Washington wrote to Congress. Despite the day's misfortune, his men were in good spirits. They still had the courage to fight another day. He promised General Hancock that another time they would compensate for the losses sustained. 15 days after Brandywine, Lord Cornwallis marched into Philadelphia, unopposed.